This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me. Hello, everyone.
Hi, guys.
Welcome to Q&A 52, brought to you by the loud noises of traffic in Kate's neighborhood. And the letter A for annoyed. There you go.
Nice.
Sesame Street style intros from now on. Anyway, I've lost the plot. Clearly, I didn't have anything fun to say about 52, but there you go.
Yeah, I don't have anything fun either, but I guess we can just dive in.
Anyway, welcome to 52. It's exciting. Here we go. Michelle starts us off.
Here we go. Okay. This one says, I have a friend who self-identifies as BPD. She's in an emotionally abusive relationship with a man who she sees as a narcissist. She developed alcoholism and self-harm in this relationship. She won't get out. Is there anything I can do? I try to just be there for her, but I'm afraid I'm doing more harm with that because she felt understood by me. And I don't want to encourage her to be in this toxic state. What now? Is this one for radical acceptance only?
Aw, I feel like it's so sweet that this listener is caring about their friend in such a way that they're reaching out and trying to find out if there's more they can do. So first of all, just hats off for being a good friend. And then I wanted to start off not so much from a DBT perspective as from a personal perspective, and say that as someone who has been in a similar position to the one you describe your friend as being, I can tell you what I appreciated most in my friends during that time. I deeply appreciated friends who were honest with me about what they saw in my relationship, the impacts they saw it having on me, right? Their opinions. I preferred this to people who sugarcoated things and or just didn't say anything at all because they didn't want to tell me the truth. So I appreciated honesty, but I also appreciated, combined with that, not separately, the people who also made clear that they loved me and supported me no matter what I chose. Right? They weren't going to mollycoddle me and tell me they were fine with everything, but they weren't going to abandon me to it either. Right? They were there for me and to support me through it. So your friend may differ, but that was my experience when I was in something close to her shoes. As for skills, because I like to throw those in there when I can, you're right. Radical acceptance is absolutely a good one to be practicing here. And I would add in maybe some improve or self-soothing just to help make going through this a little bit easier. So those are my thoughts. Mm-hmm. I didn't say it. I didn't say so, yeah. Now I have.
Happens all the time still. Yeah, I mean, with the point that they ended on, which is this one for radical acceptance only. I mean, I agree with you, Kate. It's definitely a situation for radical acceptance.
Yeah.
You know, I think radical acceptance really is the go-to skill whenever we have somebody in our lives who we care about and they are making decisions or doing things that we disagree with and we wish they weren't doing. That is really, I view it as a textbook time for radical acceptance because we cannot control what another person decides to think, say, or do. We can't. But the point of, is this one for radical acceptance only? You know, you tacked on self-soothing or improve. I mean, I would maybe, the way that I was thinking of it, and it's hard because we don't know what conversations have looked like between this listener and their friend.
That's true.
We don't know. We don't know what this listener has said to their friend. You know, we don't know. However, I would imagine, I was envisioning it as maybe when you've been trying to support her, you're coming at it more from using give. Probably looks gentle, validating, all of that we talk about with give. And what would be different if you changed the conversations between the two of you about her relationship to maybe have your responses be a little more in alignment with fast? And this doesn't mean you're going to turn into a total dick. The same way that I think sometimes people have this perception that when you're using give, you're acting like a doormat. People might think that if you're using fast, you're being an asshole. And that's not true at all for either of those things. Because with fast, being fair, no apologies, sticking to your values and being truthful. So maybe bringing in, like Kate was talking about how, you know, you said, Kate, that you've appreciated it when friends have brought in some being truthful and some honesty. So maybe it's just bringing that in a little bit more to be truthful. And that truthfulness could look like saying things like, you know, I am worried about you. If you haven't said that yet, you could maybe consider saying that. It looks like making sure that you are not apologizing in the conversation, if there would be anything that you're apologizing for or anything like that. And making sure that you're being fair, right, to her and to yourself. And again, I think really the key element out of those four is going to be the be truthful. And that in being truthful, that is a way for you to be fair to yourself and your values and those core pieces of what fast is about. So maybe see if you could try bringing in a little more of those elements. And I think, and this is what's great, is that the interpersonal effectiveness skills do not have to exist in a bubble. You can do elements of fast while also being gentle and acting interested and being validating and using an easy manner, right? You can really combine them. But keeping those parts of fast at the front of your mind when you're communicating with her, that may make a bit of a difference here.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
All right. This next one says, I feel like I'm falling out of love with DBT. I did a whole year of standard DBT and I loved every second of it. However, my therapist and I decided I could benefit from RO-DBT as I struggle with over-control. I don't know what changed, but I don't feel that passion for it anymore. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything. I also haven't been practicing my skills. I've struggled to want to go to group or stay the whole time. But I love my therapist and group leader. Any idea on how to refresh my skills training? Gracious me, I can't talk today either.
I was really glad when we got this question because I think this is an important thing to name that people experience, either with DBT specifically or with therapy as a whole or whatever it may be, where maybe in the beginning you felt a lot of passion and excitement and then you find that fading over time. This is super common. And sometimes people feel a lot of shame in bringing it up or like there's something wrong with them or that kind of a thing. And that's not the case. Our relationship with things changes over time. So when I first read this, my initial thought was that maybe RODBT isn't the best fit for you. Like even if you do struggle with over control, so even if on paper it seems like it would be a good thing for you to do and go through, it doesn't mean that those skills are just going to automatically fit for you the way that the standard DBT skills might have felt like they did. And like you're also in a different place in your life now than when you first started with doing DBT initially. So that may be a big part of this too. Like you're in a different place with your healing. And maybe at the time when you started DBT, there was this real, like, I don't know, hunger, this need for the skills to try to keep you afloat. And then now that you're staying afloat pretty good, you might just not need RODBT in the same way that you did with DBT. So all of those would be really valid reasons for why you find yourself in this position. But in terms of what to do or where do you go from here, it sounds like this is what I read into this anyways, that like you're in the middle of an RODBT program. You still have groups to attend. You're still in this thing. And I would recommend just trying to show up to your groups with an attitude of willingness, to pull in some standard DBT. Show up with willingness. Keep an open mind to whatever you're going to learn that day. Try with each group to find something of value that you're taking away. You may be like, this whole group tonight, like this did not help me very much. There was this one thing out of 100, right? Find something to take away that either the group leaders are sharing with you or that another participant said or something like that. So show up with willingness. And also, I think it would be interesting, and, we had a whole episode about RODBT, but I owned it in that episode that I've only gone through level 1 RODBT training, which is just giving you an overarching picture of like what RODBT is and why it exists and that kind of a thing. So I don't actually know a whole lot of RODBT skills, but I wonder if you could take the RODBT skills that you're learning in group and see if you can, I don't know, combine them with DBT skills or find any kind of similarities. See how you can mix it up to make it so that it feels maybe a little more like a good fit for you. And that might, I don't know, add some flavor, bring in some stuff from DBT that you're already familiar with, and that might make it more interesting rather than just feeling like I have to do RODBT by the book. And I'm supposed to like these skills and find benefit from these skills just as much as standard DBT. No, you're going to have a different experience here, and that's not a bad thing or a wrong thing. Just seeing if you can try to find any little benefit from continuing on with this group and finishing it to completion is what I would recommend.
Nice. I think you got a lot of really great ideas in there, so I don't have an enormous amount to add to Michelle's thoughts, but honestly, the first thing that occurred to me is that maybe you need or want just a little bit of a palate cleanser or a little break. One of the things that I thought I got from reading this was that you just sort of rolled straight over from being in a year-long DBT, like standard DBT program, right into an RODBT program. I love DBT. I love DBT skills. And I also need occasional breaks from DBT to just breathe a little differently, right? Like to just not be so immersed in the same thing for so long. If you are, in fact, still in the group, like Michelle was talking about, I love her suggestions for how to engage in it until the end such that you can get the most out of it possible. And if you still haven't found your excitement again at the end of that, don't despair. It's possible you just need to, put the binder away for a couple of weeks and be like, yes, I know these are skills. I'm going to come back to them. I'm going to renew my practice in, 2 to 4 weeks after I've just not been immersed in this for quite such a steadfast period of time. So that was one thing I thought about just based on my own experience of loving the skills and having a passion for teaching them and still needing some time when I am not doing that quite so consistently. The other thing I thought is that maybe, with most things, I would say, in life, there's a natural diminishment in just how exciting they are, right? The longer we are exposed to or engaged in doing any given thing, it tends to just it may not wilt all the way out of excitement, but a whole lot of, if not most things do exit the excitement phase eventually. So getting out of excitement doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, right? It can look like transitioning out of excitement, but maybe into a space of reliability, dependability, habit, feeling a sense of mastery even, right? Like, I've got this. right? It may not be a thrill a minute, right? You may not feel that same spark or passion for the thing, but now it's firmly a part of your tool belt, right? It's something you can reach for and know will be there and be able to utilize well, which is often not terribly exciting, but that's not negative, right, in this particular instance. So I also wondered if maybe you were focused really hard on missing that or wanting that passion and excitement and might be missing some of the benefits of where you are. If you're not in that just like, Jesus, fuck, I need a couple weeks without some DBT, which would also make perfect sense. So I think mine maybe are in a little two different kinds of places, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Yep. But I liked it because on the one hand, you're really emphasizing that there can be too much of a good thing. I think that can be true when it comes to therapy and like doing your healing, growing work. You can definitely sometimes burn out from that if you're doing too much, but also like really normalizing how excitement just fades with all things over time, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those both make sense to me. Okay. The next one says, hello, everyone. I started listening to the podcast and made the decision to try out DBT quite recently. I'm currently finishing the mindfulness module, and I've been running into one particular struggle. Do you have any tips for calming down and keeping yourself accountable for making positive change in your life when you notice that you have a feeling of losing control for any reason, either exclusively due to your personal feelings or something in your life that you can't control, but it still upsets you? When that happens, I find it so easy to let go of all the good habits I established, and it's hard to jump back.
That's true. I feel that. That's a reasonable struggle. So I guess I'll start with just validating that. And yeah, I guess I wrote this in opposite order in my notes, but I'm going to start with it instead of finish with it. Most of us do deal with a diminished capacity for skills with some, in many different places or times, but especially I'd say we all struggle with that when emotionally flooded. One of the things I like to say a lot is that the more emotional we get, right, the lower our IQ drops. Right? Mm-hmm. It almost doesn't matter what the emotion is, right? I mean, even with happiness, occasionally we get stupid happy, right? Like if we're really intensely feeling an emotion, you're right, it's incredibly easy to just let go of good habits and fall back on the things that are more habitual to us, right? Because we know them even with our diminished IQ and or capacity in that moment. So just heaps and tons of validation, and that the struggle that this listener is going through is absolutely normal to go through. That said, what are some things that you can do about it? Some of my favorite ways to use mindfulness specifically for calming down are to be mindful of my breathing, right? That's something that's always there with me. And so I can dip into being mindfully aware of and present with my breath, doing a body scan, doing some sort of mindful grounding activity. Like, I don't know if you've heard Michelle and I talk about this before, but like looking around your space and naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and maybe, depending on the environment, 1 thing you can taste. Things like that. So, right, really easy, low bar of accessibility mindfulness activities to kind of slow things down, right? Again, as mindfulness implies, bring you into the present moment, right? And maybe help you take a half a step back from whatever emotion is really flooding you in the moment. It sounds like for you, like being powerless or helpless or losing control, something like that. Once you are able to remember that there's even a skill that you're wanting to do, it can help to do a pros and cons. That can be a good way to show yourself why you're making positive changes, or why you want to engage in that skill instead of not, which, thinking about it now, this person explicitly said that they're only in the mindfulness module, which by now, hopefully you've gotten to pros and cons.
Or just listen to that episode.
That's true. That's fair.
Go back to wherever you are in your group or in the podcast.
That's true. And, along with all that validation, just have compassion for yourself, right? Self-compassion is super important here. again, it's incredibly normal to go through what you're going through. So it's not something that you're doing wrong. It's just a side effect of being human. So see if you can have compassion for yourself there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, going back to what the listener said, where they started the question and they said, you have any tips for calming down and keeping yourself accountable for making positive change in your life? So I really honed in on that piece of what they wrote with the keeping yourself accountable.
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that? One thing that we can know, but sometimes struggle to remember or put into practice or to accept, is that we always have choices. We can fool ourselves really easy into believing that we don't have choices, but we do. And sometimes the choices are very limited. And sometimes the choice is not about an actual event, but then we're facing a choice in how we want to respond to that thing. Because as we were acknowledging, I think with the first one in the Q&A, right? You will have people who do things in your life that you can't control and that you don't like. And that's a very common theme that will happen to us all. And there could be other things where, yeah, decisions are made that you really don't get to have much say over. But that's, I think, the piece to remember, is that you always have a choice at the very least in how you respond to this thing happening, even if you don't have a choice over the thing itself. And so when you can actually keep that front of your mind and remember it in challenging, stressful moments, then hopefully you can then, I did not even write this down in my notes, I'm just noticing, but this is what wise mind is for. I was about to say, then you can access your wise mind. I did not write down wise mind in my notes, but this is exactly what we're talking about. And this is exactly what this listener is really alluding to. They don't use the term wise mind either, but that's really what they're getting at. Like, how do I find my wise mind?
I love it.
And when things are happening that are really hard to cope with, basically. But I did think of, Kate already named a number of really great mindfulness practices. And I think when it comes to mindfulness, it can be helpful to approach it in the way that we love how DBT talks about it, which is that you can just be mindful as you're going about your day, right? You don't have to necessarily press the pause button in your daily activities and do a mindfulness activity in order to practice mindfulness. But I also like when you can and do practice intentional mindfulness activities like we're really talking about in response to this listener. So Kate already mentioned a couple that are really great. I'm going to mention another one. So you have tons to choose from, listener. The idea that came to mind for me, which is that if you're right, let's say something just happened. It's a terrible, awful thing that just happened. You didn't have control over the situation, and now you're dealing with this outcome, and you're trying to stay rooted and grounded and not go spiraling. That one way that you could practice mindfulness here is to basically do a visualization exercise, which is like what we do for closing moments. Ideally, close your eyes and picture yourself facing either like different doors or different paths in front of you. And imagine that each one represents a different way that you can respond to this stressful situation. So try to think of course, at least 2. I would stop at like 3 to 5, because if you go beyond that, if you start imagining 6, 7, 8 outcomes or possibilities, that might get a little overwhelming. But picture somewhere between 2 to 5 different options in front of you, and really imagine yourself opening each door and seeing what's behind it, or walking down each path and seeing not just what you're imagining in your mind's eye, but also how your body feels when you're imagining that scenario, right? You open door number 1, you see what's behind it for what you can do next. And then while you're imagining what's behind door number 1, see what comes up for you physically. How does your body respond to seeing that outcome for you? And then, yeah, do that with each option. And then try to pick the one that feels best. And that can then be the response that you choose to take. I think it's maybe also important to acknowledge, I don't think either of us really hit on this too much, and I didn't put this in my notes. This is just coming up for me now, as things do when we actually are in the middle of recording. I think it is important to really validate that sometimes, I think how maybe both of us were envisioning this for this listener is like, you're facing a really, like, something happens, it's hard, it's difficult, it's challenging, and then you're facing maybe, I don't know, a big decision, or you're able to like take some time and space to do one of these mindfulness activities before you respond. I want to acknowledge that sometimes you may be in the moment and doing any of these things. I mean, Kate's idea of the 5 things you could see, 4 things you could touch, et cetera, that can be one that can actually be done really quickly and can be done nearly anytime, anywhere. So that may be a good go-to one. Mine, I'm really envisioning it as like, you need to set aside about 20 to 30 minutes to be in peace and quiet to really contemplate this. And I know you may not always get that chance. So it's great if you do have that opportunity, but if you don't, there will be, listener, there will be more DBT skills to come than beyond mindfulness to do. Such as stop. Stop would be a good one. So stop is great in situations where it's like, I'm like actively in this situation and I have to keep, basically responding and thinking on my feet and keep going and that kind of a thing. Stop is a good one. Kate, I like that you brought in pros and cons. I think that's a good skill that once someone gets practice with it, you can do hopefully pretty quickly in the moment, hopefully. But just in general, I think cultivating a wise mind, which just takes time and practice when you're not in stressful situations, then hopefully you can get into a wise mind state with more ease when you are facing challenging situations in your life where, you feel like you're losing control. Wise mind can hopefully help you pretty quickly see the options available to you and pick the one that's going to be most effective. So, there could be a lot of different ways that this could look.
That's true. On to the last one?
Yep.
On to the last one. All right, this one's super short. This one just says, I wonder if anyone has tips for fixing a messed up sleep cycle. I keep going to sleep at 4 a.m. and waking up at 2 p.m. I want to fix this.
So there's a lot we don't know here. So as I'm going through my responses, I want to acknowledge that different things will work under different circumstances. So I think I originally thought of this as a situation where maybe the listener is not having a hard time falling asleep. Like they're just, I don't know, maybe they're just kind of naturally staying up until this time, and then it gets to be about 4 a.m. and they're like, hey, I should go to sleep. And then they go to sleep, hopefully with relative ease, and then they wake up about, well, I'm guessing, how many hours is that? It's about 10 hours later. So they're sleeping a good amount of time. But let's say the falling asleep isn't the problem. That once you actually get into bed, you fall asleep relatively quickly. If that's the case, then what I would recommend, I'd put like a bunch of O's here, slow, in my notes, slow adjustment in 15-minute increments until you reach your goal. So what I mean by that is like if you're currently going to bed at 4 a.m., start going to bed at 3:45. Once you're doing that for a night or two, go to bed at 3:30. Once you're doing that for a night or two, go to bed at 3:15. If this is feeling easy, you can bump it up, right? You could do a 30-minute increment or that kind of a thing. But you want to try it for a night or two and then move it up further. The key here with this idea, you're going to need to set alarms. So like if your goal, okay, I typically am going to bed, like I'm crawling into bed around 4 a.m. I'm going to make sure I get into bed at 3:45. Set an alarm, maybe for like 3:40 or even earlier to alert you like, hey, get into bed now, and set an alarm to wake you up. at your desired time. Nothing wrong with the 10 hours of sleep. I mean, if this listener can do that, that's fine. That's great. So set your alarm for 10 hours later and get yourself up. But if you also recognize like, oh, I might need to start adjusting down to where I'm sleeping 9 hours or 8 hours, right? Like set your wake up alarm accordingly. But that's what I would recommend. Set a going to sleep alarm where it warns you to get into bed, and a waking up alarm. Now, let's throw out a different scenario. Let's say this listener is having a hard time falling asleep. So let's say, I don't know, let's say they're getting into bed around midnight and they're just not falling asleep until 4 a.m. So they're trying. That could be another option here. That's what's happening. I mean, one of the things that my brain naturally went to was just like, of course, with the doctor's guidance, don't listen to me. I'm not a medical provider. Go listen to your doctor. But to consider incorporating a sleep aid like melatonin, which is, a fairly natural one out there. Like seeing if you could try something to help your brain out in getting sleepy. If that's the problem, if you're, getting into bed and you just can't fall asleep, seeing if you can get a little bit of extra help there with something you can take. And the other thing, which Kate's going to talk more about, so I won't say much here, but yeah, if it's a situation where, it's a hard time falling asleep and that's why you're staying up until 4 a.m., seeing if there are things you can change in your environment too, to set you up for better sleep. Because that's what I hope for. I hope it can be, I can't remember, Kate, I don't know if you know off the top of your head. I think it's something like ideally we're supposed to fall asleep within 30 minutes after getting into bed. I think 30.
Yeah, you're not supposed to stay in bed longer than 30 minutes if you don't fall asleep. You're supposed to get up.
Yeah, that's the hope, that you get into bed and you're falling asleep within 30 minutes. And I've heard something too, which I'm like, oh, well, that says something about me. That like, let's say if you're falling asleep like under 10 minutes or something, like that's not ideal either. That just means like you are sleep deprived. I'm like literally these days, I'm out within like 5 minutes of my head hitting the pillow. But ideally, right, like most people, it's within like probably a 15 to 30 minute range for where you're falling asleep. So if it's taking you much longer than that to fall asleep, that's going to be the thing to work on, even more so than adjusting in those 15-minute increments like I was talking about. Try that once you're actually feeling like you're falling asleep easier after getting into bed, if that's the struggle. So I'll turn it over to you, Kate, so you can talk more about that, like sleep environment stuff and how to make that work for you.
I was going to say sleep environment, but also just how you're engaging with your sleep environment, I guess.
Yeah.
Because when I think about sleep hygiene, the first thing I think about are like behavioral changes.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there's brought to you by the letter A for annoyance about street traffic again. Anyway, sorry guys. So like the first thing, and probably the one that most people have heard the most, is trying to get off of screens, right? I don't know many people who are good about this, but I hear good things from the people I know who are good about it. I'll say that. It does appear to actually work to help you go to sleep more when you want to. But right, so trying to get off of screens, or at least turning down the blue volume, right? Or blue value, on your screen volume. On your device screen, right? Yeah, there are programs you can get, at least for your laptop, I assume, and your desktop. I assume you could do it for your phones too, but programs that just know when your sunrise and sunset are, and they like change the screen accordingly after dark.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I have it on both of my computers at home, my laptop and my desktop. Right, so that's something you can do if you are on screens. You can at least change the light values on that screen so it's less likely to keep you up. Also, another one I know most people aren't great about, so these might be places you can make changes also, are things like you're only supposed to try to sleep and or have fun times, sexy times on the bed, right? Like the bed is mostly just meant to be for sleeping. You're not supposed to get on the bed to read, to scroll through your phone, to watch TV, to play computer games, right? Like it's supposed to be for sleeping and or sexing. And that's really all you're supposed to be doing on there. It's great to have an intentional, deliberate, consistent bedtime routine. It doesn't have to be anything incredibly elaborate. You don't end up in, Barnum and Bailey's circus at the end. But just doing the same things in the same order every night before bed. That can be as simple as brushing and flossing your teeth and taking off your clothes and turning off the light and meditating, right? Like, there you go. It doesn't have to be anything super exciting. Just, again, consistent. Same things, same order, every night. We're all Pavlov's dogs in the end, as I've said before. And that's just setting up a thing where your brain goes, ooh, they're brushing their teeth. I know what comes next, right? Like, it's bedtime. I've figured it out. And so, right, it starts changing things neurochemically in anticipation of sleep. If you can train your brain that those things lead to sleep. As like sleep environment stuff, and don't tell me if you were thinking about things more than this, Michelle, but I think about things like trying to have the room just a little bit cooler. Most people sleep better if their room is a little bit on the cool side as opposed to warm. Again, most people do better with less light in their environments. I'm certainly guilty of this one, but it's not great to fall asleep with like a TV on or a movie on or a other thing on.
White noise can help.
Yes, sorry, yeah. But like
not the screen.
Most white noise. I was gonna say most white noise don't have flickering lights.
Yep.
Or, well, maybe I'm just a weirdo, and when I go to fall asleep, it's to movies that are incredibly familiar to me. But most of the movies incredibly familiar to me involve screaming. I sleep through it, but it's probably not the best thing to try and fall asleep to. It's like Aliens, Jurassic Park. Anyway, I have weird taste in sleep movies. But, right, so trying to, sometimes you can add things to your environment that might make it nice if you find that like lavender or the smell of chamomile or other essential oils help for you. Again, white noise, Michelle isn't wrong there. Noise that is going to turn off. So like I love a, podcast that's called Nothing Much Happens, Bedtime Stories for Adults. I know there are others like that out there. That's just the one I'm familiar with. Things like that. Trying to set up the comfiest, coziest, darkest space that you only use for sleep. That's not full of screens and loud noises. Any thoughts other than that on sleep environment?
No, I think you hit on everything. I've heard stuff too in terms of I don't know if you were about to think about this, but eating before bed can really impact us. Is that what you were thinking?
No, I was actually thinking the opposite thing. Well, sort of, which is if you, like we were saying, don't stay in bed longer than 30 minutes. And if you do, like, you get up and like do something boring or quiet, and then try again after a little bit. But something that can help is eating a little tiny bit of snack. Because it can turn on your digestive system and help you be a little bit more drowsy if, say, anxiety is something that contributes to you staying awake. So.
And something very boring, like an apple or a piece of toast.
Yes.
That kind of thing. So, being mindful, too, I
boring
think, around
food and boring activity.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And, like, just being mindful of the timing, the same way that you were talking about the timing of screens, I was recalling, too, like the timing of exercise and the timing of eating before bed can also really make a difference. Exercising during the day, they've actually shown can help you sleep better at night, but you don't want to exercise too close to bed.
Yeah.
You don't want to eat too close to bed. So I would say try to make sure, I'm making up these numbers. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I would say rule of thumb, probably about an hour before bed. Make sure you aren't snacking in that hour before bed. And with exercise, I think actually probably longer they recommend.
Longer, I think.
2 or 3 hours before bed, no more exercise.
I'm not sure, but yeah.
So, like, if you want to go for a run, if that's your thing, don't do it, as part of your bedtime routine. Like 30 minutes before bed. Just don't do that. Your body's physiologically going to amp up when you're exercising. So, yeah, some of the timing of those things, too, makes the difference. So
that makes sense. The other thing that I think about is when someone's engaged in a sleep pattern that they don't like but are having a hard time fixing, is trying to look at what the motivation is for what your current pattern is. So, for instance, are you super depressed? or overworked. Both of those can, in me, cause me to delay going to sleep because the next thing that happens is tomorrow. And so if there's reasons that I am not positively anticipating tomorrow, I can somehow, something in me is like, I'm putting off tomorrow. Like, nah, shit, you're just getting less sleep going into it. You're not actually putting off the day, but in my psychology, right? Like in my brain, it will feel like I'm putting it off. So depression, or overwhelm or overworked, burnout, things like that. Are there interpersonal motivations? Like, is staying up the only time you get to see your partner? Is it the only time no one else is awake and you get the house to yourself? Is there something relationally based? Just trying to figure out what feels like the underlying cause or motivation, maybe. And if there's a need that's going unmet, except for if you stay up late or go to bed early or whatever the thing is that you're trying to change, see if you can attend to those needs in other ways, right? Can you wake up a bit early before people go to work to get time alone in the house as opposed to staying up super late after everyone goes to bed? I don't know, right? Like, are there other ways that you can try and meet the needs that are driving your current behavior? Because sometimes that can do. Sometimes nothing we try and do physiologically can work if psychologically we're not addressing how we got here in the first place. So,
yeah, great stuff to think about. Okay, that brings us to the end.
Yeah.
Ta-da! Ta-da! So if you have a question for us, you can send it either in an email to dbtmepodcast@gmail.com, or you can post about it in our Facebook group and get wonderful feedback from awesome people in the group if you feel comfortable doing that. So either way works. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT and Me Podcast.